Also, if I start talking too fast, just tell me to slow down. And if you have questions, feel free to ask them throughout. This is Beverly Little Thunder. Beverly Little Thunder helped create the term Two Spirit in the early 1990s. She is a Lakota elder, a women's activist, and a member of the Standing Rock Lakota Band from North Dakota. So you may have heard a lot about Standing Rock when the pipeline, the whole issue with the pipeline going through the Standing Rock Reservation. So she is a member of that nation. And she helped coin, although the term was used historically, she helped actually coin that term in the night, create that term in the 90s. So you may be wondering what Two Spirit is. Two Spirit is a term that's only appropriate for Native people. There has been use of the term by non-natives, and that is not okay. Um, It's a role that exists in a Native and Indigenous tribe for gender queer, gender fluid, and gender non-conforming tribal members. Um, it is a collective of Native and Indigenous people who use traditional knowledge to understand their spiritual ground in gender roles and gender expressions. So Two Spirit is, I'm sorry, let me go back a little bit. I should have started out by saying that I am bringing this knowledge as a cisgender heterosexual woman, but in my research of Native culture, experiencing Native culture, and in sex ed, I've learned more about Two Spirit, and I've also consulted with some people who have done work in Two Spirit education to help me with this presentation. So I'm sorry about not saying that in the beginning, but it's definitely in the work that I've done and research that I've done, found that Two Spirit individuals were looked at as somewhat as the medicine men and women. They were, you know, the people that you go to for different occasions. They were spiritual advisors, and all of it, you know, pretty much related to a spiritual connection. So they were highly thought of within their communities. And not all Two Spirit people are identified as LGBTQ plus, and not all LGBTQ plus people identify as Two Spirit. So one thing that I learned recently was that, you know, to kind of go off of this, that Two Spirit does not indicate colonized box definitions of LGBTQ plus. And a lot of times people do get that confused, but it is not the same. And if you give me 1 second, there's a tribe, I believe it's in San Francisco, but I'm gonna look it up just so I'm not telling you wrong. They have a powwow in which they honor and allow Two Spirit individuals to dance. Um, and it's really dependent upon location, and tribe and region. Unfortunately, is not the same for every tribe or nation. I know some do not allow um, Two Spirit some do not recognize Two Spirit individuals, and some don't allow people who identify outside of the gender or sex they were assigned at birth to dance in another category. So, for example, in Native communities, there's typically men and women category styles of dance. So, men's fancy, men's grass, men's traditional, women's fancy, women's jingle, women's traditional. And I know some tribes, if you are born, forgive me if I'm not using the proper terminology right now. If your sex assigned at birth is different from what you identify, they won't let you dance in that category, which is unfortunate. Um, but going back to the Bay in San Francisco, so there's a Bay Area American Indian Two Spirit powwow. So there's an actual powwow just for Two Spirit individuals, and all Native people are allowed to dance and compete in their chosen gender categories, which I think is really awesome. Um, not only that they accept two-spirit individuals, but that they also allow them to dance in their chosen gender categories. Um, and just kind of going off of that, there's an international two-spirit council, and over 40 regional two-spirit societies, as well as the Cherokee language has 10 different pronouns, which I think that is amazing. And they're all gender neutral. And so there's also, speaking of powwows, there's this really big powwow. It's called Gathering of Nations, and it's usually in New Mexico, I believe, where basically all the tribal nations from across the country or even outside of the country come together for this really, really big powwow. And it, it can be, it's a few days, I believe. But in 2018, two-spirit individuals were honored doing grand entry at Gathering of Nations. And grand entry is basically where it's the beginning of the powwow each day. So it's led by the head dancers, the flag carriers, and typically, well, in my powwow at least, it's also whoever's leading the prayer that day. So they lead the group in, and it's all of the people who are dancing in the powwow just come in for grand entry, and they do not stop dancing until every person is in the arena. And you have people who are considered golden age, so 55 and up, to the babies. Newborn babies sometimes are out there in regalia being carried by their parents and families. So two spirit individuals were recognized at grand entry during Gathering of Nations. And another thing, there's at least 40 tribes that recognize same-sex couples, including the Cherokee Nation. Which, when you think about how many tribes there are throughout the United States, whether it's federal or state recognized, it may not seem like a lot, but considering how Native populations are, when it comes to demographics and whatnot, that is pretty huge. Um, so I also wanted to say, so as you can see in this picture, there's a two-spirit camp. And there's a lot of different organizations. I will go back to my first slide where some of the pictures. So, oh, I didn't include it. I'm sorry. But there was another one. It may have been the Bay Area, who had, they do these. I don't know if it was a parade or some event, but there was some event where they had a banner. So it was a large two-spirit representation at this event, and I feel like I could be wrong, but I personally feel like it's more on the West Coast, in the Midwest, and that's just from what I see. But as you can see from this picture, not all two-spirit people look alike, and some of these people may not identify. Some people on this slide do identify as two-spirit, but some don't. They fall under the LGBTQ plus umbrella. Um, so it's, in a sense, like I said, it doesn't, not all two-spirit individuals identify as LGBTQ plus, and not all LGBTQ plus individuals identify as two-spirit. And I went through this a lot faster than I thought I would. So if you have any questions, feel free to ask those.
Hey, Gabby, this is Ruthie from Zyro. Thank you so much for your presentation. Can you explain what a powwow is?
Yes. So a powwow is a gathering of Native peoples in which we celebrate our culture. So for my tribe, our powwow is always the third weekend in April, and it started as us celebrating our state recognition. That was the So our powwow, I believe this year it would have been the 52nd. Um, it was either the 51st or the 52nd. But we had to cancel it because of COVID. But it occurs the same weekend, around the same time that we were given state recognition. Um, and some powwows do look different. Some are smaller, some are larger. They have them on campuses, but it's a time where we celebrate our culture with dancing, singing. There are competitions. So some of the dances the dancers are competing against one another. They also do drum competitions. So drum groups are competing against one another. There's also, we have vendors. We have our own like vendors from our tribe, but we also have other vendors not from our tribe. We also have food. It's just a really kind of like a family reunion, to be honest. And I was really sad about having to miss it this year, because I live in Houston, but I'm from North Carolina. So I was really sad about having to miss it this year, and I missed it for the first time ever 3 years ago. I had missed a powwow in 25 years. Um, but it did get canceled because of COVID, because there's thousands of people. I wouldn't be surprised if over 3 days we saw at least 10,000 people.
Wow, thank you.
All right, it looks like Denise asked a question in the chat, so I'll read it for you, Gabby. It says, from your experience and knowledge, do twin-spirited individuals experience some of the same hate and phobias within the Indigenous community, or is it more embraced, or just depends, or does it just depend on the tribe?
I think it does depend on the tribe, because I this might sound, I mean, it is what it is. Some tribes are more accepting than others. So some may not even recognize two-spirit individuals, or two-spirit. And a lot of times there's unfortunately shame. People who identify as LGBTQ plus are shamed. And I think it goes back to those Christian values that were forced upon way back when. And now it's just a way of life that shouldn't necessarily be so. But I really do think it depends.
I have a clarification question.
Yes.
So, and I'm sorry if this is a silly question. So historically, like, did all tribes have the concept of two-spirited individuals, and then because of colonization, some of them branched away from that, or is this something that stemmed from certain areas and certain tribes, and then like some kept it and some didn't?
I'm not exactly sure. That is a good question. But I'm not, and I will have to do more research on that, but I'm not sure. I don't want to tell you the wrong thing. But kind of going off of that, and Donice's question. So there's a curricula called Indigenizing Love, where it talks about two-spirit, and LGBTQ plus identities. And there was a quote that I found. Let me see if I can pull it up. The quote that I found said, "We lose a crucial part of our traditional ways of life if our two-spirit relatives are not better understood and honored for the strength they bring to our communities." So that quote really resonated with me while I was looking through that curriculum. And if anybody's interested in the curriculum, if you can just Google Indigenizing Love and it should pop up. I believe it's on the Healthy Native Youth website.
Okay.
If there's more.
Oh, yeah, go ahead. I was going to say, if there's any more questions, please ask away.
Yeah, feel free to ask, and no question's a silly question. Somebody else might be wondering the same thing. I will say that so I am sharing my contact information with you all. I have been posting some things this month for Native American Heritage Month, and I have 2 more posts to share over the next week. Yeah, because it's only a week left in November, about a week or so. So I'll be sharing more information regarding Indigenous, regarding Native American Heritage Month. And since I do teach sex ed, I do typically try to tie it in with sex ed.
I have another curious question.
Okay.
So you mentioned that did you say it was the Cherokee tribe that had like different pronouns that were all gender neutral?
Yes, there's 10 pronouns in the Cherokee language.
Okay. Is there like certain like I guess I'm curious like why is there so many if they're all gender neutral? Like is there certain times or frames that they would be used, or how do they choose which one they want to use within the language?
Since I'm not familiar with the Cherokee language, so I'm not sure. I I don't know if they had maybe had some and decided to expand it, or if they wanted to just provide people with different options, or do using pronouns for different contexts. But if you shoot me an email, I really want to find this stuff out. So if you shoot me an email with your 2 questions, I will get back to you.
Okay, no worries. I'm just curious because this is the first time I'm hearing about any of it. So
Yeah, those are good questions though. Ketzel asked that I drop the minority sex report handles in the chat. So I put our Instagram and Twitter accounts on there. Thank you all for joining me.
Thank you, everybody, for coming tonight. And thank you, Gabby. This was so insightful and so helpful. I really enjoyed the presentation. I'm pretty sure everybody did too. I'll be sending you a small little gift in the mail, so be on the lookout for that. I'll get your mailing address and stuff and send those over to you. But one thing that I wanted to add as we celebrate Native American Heritage Month, we wanted to bring more awareness to missing Indigenous women. So on the 30th, we want to do a readout to recognize the missing Indigenous women. And we're going to send out resources and everything that Gabby shared here. The event was recorded, so we're going to post it on our Theater News site, YouTube, and then we'll also be sending out resources of Indigenous people that you can follow in order to get more information, and then also like books and shows and things that you can do in order to like gain more education on this particular heritage. So yeah, thank you, Gabby, and just know that we celebrate you and we're grateful to have you in our org. And thank you, everybody, for coming tonight.
Thank you. And just to add to what Ketzel said about the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women movement, I'm sure she'll be sharing this information too. But for those who are unfamiliar, is a movement that was introduced and I'll be sharing information on my page too. It's a movement that was started in 2016 to bring awareness to the sisters that have been stolen from us. Whether it was people for various reasons, is usually acts of violence, and I'm not sure I don't know if it was 2018, but after that it was declared an epidemic by the government because the numbers are so high. And the latest information, there's between I think 500 and 600 cases that are documented. That doesn't count the sisters who their cases aren't documented. So we really don't know how many sisters have been stolen, and it's a lot of times people don't hear about it or know about it unless that someone has been personally affected by it. But they are now, I'm doing some qualitative interviews for class, and I recently learned that they're shifting towards missing and murdered Indigenous relatives to encompass trans and two-spirit individuals as well as men. So be on the lookout for more information.
Thank you for that. Thank you, everybody. And I hope everybody has a lovely night, and everybody stay safe out there with a pandemic and all. So take care. One love to you all.
Bye.